Today we're starting 5.2. We're going to start solving quadratic equations. Before we start solving quadratic equations, you have to know a couple of rules. All of our equations are going to be some form of x squared equals a right now. If I were to solve for a, what's the opposite of a square? Square root. If x squared equals a, and a is greater than 0, then x equals the square root of a, or x equals the negative square root of a. The way we usually write it is x equals plus or minus the square root of a. If I pick a number, and if I put in 2, what is 2 squared? 4. What's negative 2 squared? What's negative 2 times negative 2? 4. So a positive and a negative both give me 4. So I don't know what's originally in here, because both of them, if I just have x squared. If I called this x, called this x, do I know if it's positive or negative? What does a square always do? It makes everything positive. So I don't know if originally there was a positive number or a negative on the inside. So it's going to be, to get rid of a square, I take the square root here, take the square root here. X equals plus or minus the square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2, so it's plus or minus 2. There was either a plus 2 or a minus 2 on the inside. Why do I have this aspect right here? A is greater than 0. Give me something that's less than 0. Negative 1. Could I have a negative 1 here? Why not? Why can't it be negative? X is always squared, and a squared always makes a positive. So it's always going to be equal to a positive. If this was a negative here, let's see, x squared equals negative 1. To get rid of a square, I take the square root. Try taking the square root of negative 1 in your calculator. If I try taking the square root of negative 1, non-real answer. I can't take any number and multiply it to get a negative 1. For example, if I had, what's the square root of 25? 5. But the square root of negative 25, I can't take the square root of a negative number, because negative 5 times negative 5 gets me a positive 25. I can't get two of the same numbers and multiply to get a negative. There's a couple properties of square roots. The product property. All it says is if I have the square root of AB, the square root of AB is the same thing as square root of A times the square root of B. If I pick some numbers, square root of 16. What's the square root of 16? 4. But I could think of the square root of 16 as the square root of 4 times 4, right? Which this right here means square root of 4 times the square root of 4. What's the square root of 4? 2 times 2 equals 4. If I have two things on the inside, if I have square root of 15, how can I rewrite the square root of 15? 5 times 3, which is the same thing as the square root of 5 times the square root of 3. Just to show you on the calculator. Square root of 15 is this. If I take the square root of 2 and the square root of 3, I don't know why I took 2. Square root of 5 and the square root of 3. If I take the square root of 5 and I multiply it by the square root of 3, see what number I get? It's the same thing as the square root of 15. Same thing works for quotient. If I have the square root of a divided by b, that is the same thing as the square root of a divided by the square root of b. Just to show you with an example. Square root of 1/25. That is the same thing as the square root of 1 over the square root of 25. What's the square root of 1? 1. What's the square root of 25? So it's 1/5. If I put this in the calculator, square root of 1/25, I get 0.2, which is 1/5. Do you understand how square roots can be broken apart? Here's the types of problems we're going to be dealing with right now. 4x squared plus 13 equals 269. Don't even think about the x squared. Just think of it like a typical problem. What would I do first? Subtract 13. Subtract 13, subtract 13. 4x squared equals 269 minus 13, 256. Now what would I do? Divide by 4. 256 divided by 4. 64. Now I have x squared equals 64. Now in order to get rid of a square, I take the square root. X equals plus or minus 8. Because I took the square root, I don't know if originally inside of that x was it positive 8 or negative 8. Just to show you. I'm going to take negative 8, I'm going to store it in for x. 4x squared plus 13. What did I get? 269, which is what it was equal to. If I store positive 8 into x, and I still have the same function, I get 269. Both the positive 8 and the negative 8 work. You need to have plus or minus. If you just wrote 8 as an answer, you're missing one aspect of it. Here I have 9 times the quantity of x minus 2 squared equals 121. I can't distribute. This 9 can't break in there first because that's squared. But I'm not going to FOIL this. Think of this as one giant x right here. What does that say then? 9x squared equals 121. What do I need to do first? Divide by 9. (121) divided by 9. Can I do that evenly? No. So I'm going to leave 121 over 9. What's causing me the problem? What's causing me the problem right now? The square. How do I get rid of a square? Take the square root, take the square root. By squaring, or taking the square root of a square, I have x minus 2 equals. Do I know the square root of 121? What is it? Square root of 121 is 11. What's the square root of 9? 3. So I have plus or minus the square root, or sorry, plus or minus 11 thirds. I have x minus 2 equals plus or minus 11 thirds. What do I need to do here to solve? Add 2. So if I add 2, x equals 2 plus or minus 11 thirds. Notice that I didn't put the 2 in with that, because I really have two separate problems here. I have 2 plus 11 thirds, I have 2 minus 11 thirds. I have two separate answers, but I just write plus or minus. That saves me from having to write it twice. If I wanted to find out the approximate answers, I would take 2 plus 11 thirds. This one is about 5.67. And that one's about negative 1.67. If I were to substitute both of these, there are solutions. If I put it in the calculator, 9x minus 2 squared. I guess with this one, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. I'd have to find out when it's equal to 121. When would it be equal to 121? In between 5 and 6 right here. Isn't that in between 5 and 6? And the other place is in between here. So you have two solutions. Absolute value problems have two solutions. Or not absolute value, square root problems have two solutions, just like absolute values. You're also going to see word problems. What was the other solution? Here's your answer. That's all you need to write. I'm just letting you know they mean two separate answers. You have 2 plus 11 thirds, 2 minus 11 thirds. But you just write it once like this. You don't have to tell me the decimal aspect. But don't try to solve 2 plus 11 thirds and forget about the negative. Write this problem down. So you have the ball. From the top of the school, it is just dropped. It's not thrown, anything. It's just taken from the top of the building and dropped. It falls 120 feet. I want to know, how long does it take the ball to drop or to hit the ground? I have this function. H of t is talking about the height. So what do I want to know for my height? What's my height right here? This height's 120. What's this height right here? Someone said it. Can't be negative. 0. So I want to find out when the height is 0. I want you to solve this. Coming around, I see a lot of people starting off correct. What's my first step? Subtract 120. So 120 has to go to the other side. Negative 120 equals negative 16 t squared. What's my next step? Divide by negative 16. Now, 120 divided by 16. I get 7.5, which, if you put it to that, that's fine. 15 halves. Now what do I need to do? Take the square root. Square root, square root. T is equal to plus or minus the square root of 15 halves. That is your exact answer. Yeah, square root of 15 halves really doesn't help me out here. I want to know the time. So I'm going to actually find the square root of that. Square root of 7.5. About how long is that? Plus or minus 2.74. But at square root of 15, that I don't know that one. Square root of 2, I don't know that one. So I would have just left it as square root of 15 over 2. So the time is plus or minus 2.74 seconds. For the time, can I have a negative 2.4 seconds? No. So the only thing that makes sense for this problem is 2.74 seconds it takes for the ball to hit the ground. We don't need the minus on this one because you can't have negative time. So we took the ball, we dropped it from the top of the building. We wanted to know when it hit the ground. How about if a 6-foot tall person catches it? What's the difference between this one and this one? Okay, it's falling 114 feet. Or, what's the other way to think about it? Instead of falling 114 feet, my height here is going to be 6. So instead of 0, it's going to be 6 equals negative 16t squared plus 120. Which someone said when you move that over, you can still get your 114. How long does it take to fall to that person? Everyone's going through. Subtracting 120 and getting your negative 114. Then you're dividing by the negative 16. And you get 7.125. Now, because we're talking about time and we want to know the time, you can leave it like this. You don't have to have a fraction there. I take the square root, I take the square root. The square root of 7.125. 2.67 seconds. So it's almost a second difference. Or not even a second, a tenth of a second difference. Questions on the word problem? You've used this stuff before. Use it, especially when you do the Pythagorean theorem. What's the Pythagorean theorem? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Yeah, it's our geometry. That's what you do when you're dealing with a right triangle. You've done this stuff in geometry. You see this stuff on the PSSA, your foresight. But that's where you use the square roots. For those of you who forgot, Pythagorean theorem's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b are your legs. And it doesn't matter if you call this one the leg A and this one leg, you can flip them around. Hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. I have triangle BUG. I have this side 7, this side's 12. I want to find out what this side is. Is this side a leg or a hypotenuse? A leg. I want you to find out what B is. All right, solving this. I have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I don't care if you use a or b. 7 squared plus b squared equals 12 squared. 7 squared, 49. 12 squared is 144. What did you do here? Subtract 49, so b squared is 95. How did you solve it here? Square root, square root. B equals plus or minus the square root of 95. But does it make sense to have the square root of, or negative? Should I have a negative number? Why not? Can't have a negative side, so we just want the positive 95. The square root of 95 is about 9.75. I do the squiggly because it's not equal to exactly. How about this one? Quadratic form, Pythagorean theorem right there. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. 7 squared plus 12 squared equals g squared. You can leave it c if you wanted. 7 squareds, 49. 12 squareds, 144. 49 plus 144 is 193. Take the square root. G is about what? 13.89. Let's see if we rounded correctly. 13.89 is correct. Questions?